Richter.
And I'm Lindsay Elias Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today we're here to answer that age-old question, which is, how do you make it so that your plans in the game survive contact with the players by preparing a few things in advance, juggling multiple balls, having a few different aces in your pocket that you can pull out at any time.
And this is a reference to the general saying, no plan survives contact with the enemy, in war, and in GMing, no plan survives contacts with the players.
Right. Absolutely. So today, when we're going to be talking about whether or not a plan can survive contact with the players, we're going to be sort of separating it into three different categories, two of which are a lot closer to each other, but the one that is the most different is the one that we're going to do first. So first of all, let's suppose that there's a goal that you are confident that your players and their characters do want to do the goal. The goal they're looking to do in this session, unless they go buy wine for the whole session or something like that, they are going to be doing that goal, working towards that goal. But you gave some open-ended options. You gave multiple available ways to take care of it. It wasn't just a railroad with only one plan that an NPC told them can be done. And so anything goes in terms of their plans for how to achieve that goal.
So for example, let's say that during this session, the characters are going to want to recover a MacGuffin from a particular palace, an important item. You're not sure if they're going to try to fight their way in, if they're going to try to trick their way in, if they're going to try to heist the place, or what they're going to try to do.
Absolutely. And so
you do know acquire that specific item from that specific building is what's going on.
So when you're in that position where you know what goal that they want, but you don't know how they're going to do it, what would you suggest, Linda, for your first step in preparing for that situation?
So I'm going to assume here that you knew before the session that was what the objective for this session
We're going to go with that.
So one thing to consider is how your players have typically approached things in the past, to suggest which strategies deserve more of your planning time. If you have a group that, the vast majority of the time just charges in through the front door, making sure that you spend more time preparing for the charging in through the front door possibility makes sense. But it also makes sense to create an outline for yourself of how you can handle some of those other potential situations. So, and then you can fill in details more as needed, as well as come up with some features that might be useful in a variety of possibilities. Like, let's say, for example, that you know that there is a particular NPC who who is a very perceptive and also a skilled at combat. So this NPC is going to be encountered no matter how they approach things. If they run in through the front door, this NPC is going to be someone that they are going to need to contact and run into in a later encounter. If they are trying to heist this place, this NPC might be someone who's on guard near the treasure. And if they're trying to talk their way through, they're going to need to deal with convincing that NPC. So if you have, particular checkpoints that you think, no matter how the PCs approach the situation, they're going to need to deal with this NPC, then you can spend more time and effort in fleshing that NPC out without having to worry about, is this just gonna be wasted effort or something like that.
Absolutely. If you've watched our other episodes, then you know that we often go by, the first rule of Dungeon Craft from Ray Winnegar, which is don't create something that you don't need. However, when you are giving an open-ended goal and allowing the PCs to decide how they're going to achieve it, it winds up being true that you can get a lot of value out of prepping some of that high-level content that you may not need, but that allows you to be very flexible. Knowing the personalities and motivations of NPCs, not just the stat blocks, will allow you to handle many more different approaches that the PCs might use other than just beating that NPC, like in the example Linda gave.
Yeah, and it's also valuable to when it comes to it depends also upon how comfortable you are improvising stat blocks on the fly, but it's often useful to pull from a resource like, say Archives of Nethys that has a lot of pre-made stat blocks, and then you can tell yourself, hey, if the PCs rush their way in, I know that I'm gonna want them to be dealing with, the kind of mook level characters are gonna be around 5th level, so let me find some roughly 5th level NPCs that they might contend with.
Exactly.
And if okay, and if you're thinking, my group is a group that's very likely to come in and do the fighting strategy, then it's more worth it to spend some effort and say, okay, maybe I'll start with those NPCs and then I'll think of some ways to customize them. And then if you're thinking, my group is very likely to try to talk their way in, then it's still valuable to have some ideas of encounters because, what if things go wrong when they try to talk their way in? I find that a lot of times coming up with those sort of touchstones that, like that one NPC that I was talking about from the beginning, that they're going to need to deal with no matter what, and then a few branches. A branching story it works easiest when you have certain touchstones that you expect that the PCs are going to hit at some point. And then okay, from this touchstone, then they can go off and address things in a variety of different ways. And maybe they keep saying, we're going to keep doing the heist way. We're going to keep doing the heist way. And that's what they choose to do. Or maybe they are doing the heist way and then they see something that they really don't like. And they're like, okay, now we're going to switch to the attack way. Or maybe circumstances force them to change their strategy.
Exactly. So you can go basically narrow, wide, mm-hmm. by putting some particular points that you've prepared so thoroughly in terms of you've got the combat stats, you've got the motivation, you've got the personality, that that element will show up. Or maybe it's a room that they're going to have mm-hmm. to enter that has some information in it, maybe some skill checks that they can do, something that's going to show up, whether they sneaked in there, whether they talked their way in there, mm-hmm. whether they fought their way in there, that they're going to need to do, because that's actually something that is required for their goal. That is those skill checks, those pieces of information, that's what they were here for.
Yeah, and that sort of thing is going to be what's more memorable to the players too, those kinds of touchstones that you repair, and also having sections that are really well prepared and then sections in between that are more improvised helps you, because you can spend some brain space while you're in that place where okay, I know exactly what's going on in this room, and the PC's like, how do we approach this? Thinking about some of the things that are going to be coming up ahead, or how you might approach those.
So the last major element of this particular kind of pre-preparing multiple options that I want to make sure we talk about, because it's useful in all three, is that you, in many cases as the GM, control the timing of how things happen, including sessions. Now, not always. Sometimes you have very specific constraints and things mm-hmm. are going to be at a pretty inopportune time for you. But assuming that you are able to exercise some control, one way that you can help yourself with this is to, they have their goal and they're going to try to get into this place where these documents are that we were talking about. And maybe at the end of the previous session, you can have them do a little bit of a brainstorm mm-hmm. and somewhat narrow in on vaguely what they think their strategy is going to be.
Yeah.
Even if they change it, then in the next session, you can do your prep at that point. Whereas if you stopped being like, and then next
mm-hmm.
time,
next
we'll
time
deal
we're
with
going to gather
these
the
documents.
MacGuffin. But if the end of the last session they said, you talked about general strategies and they're like, yeah, we want to do a heist kind of plan, then you can spend a lot more effort preparing for the heist kind of plan. And of course, like I was saying, their plan might be derailed, not even just because they wanted it to be derailed, but checks fail and they have to spin off. So when you're
the example you gave was a heist that became a combat by failing.
Like that example. So prepping not just for how players might choose differently, but also for those kinds of failing forward opportunities.
And you have to think about this, because the natural thing to do might have been, let's say the last session was you were fighting against demons. You might be like, okay, you've beaten the demons, you get a breather, we'll stop for there. Mm-hmm. And then in the next one, you're like, now I must introduce that you need to find these MacGuffins.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, that is a more natural way to split the session,
mm-hmm.
not end on a cliffhanger necessarily. But if you end on that sort of cliffhanger, be like, you need the MacGuffins, in a highly, mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Controlled and protected facility. How do you think you're going to do that? that will allow you to have time to prepare for their approach.
It also makes players more excited for the next session because it doesn't end on, oh, we're going to go off and do these sorts of things. Even if it leads to a slight temporal discontinuity. Like, let's say that after defeating the demons, the players are going to have a month of downtime in which to prepare for, like, assaulting the fortress as a whole. And, maybe you ask them what kind of strategies are they going to want to use to assault the fortress as a whole. Or maybe you go ahead and put in some of that downtime at the end of that session, the part where they're gathering information to try to pick up on a next plan. So that you at least have some idea about where they're heading. As opposed to, like, doing kind of like the downtimey things and then having to be like, wait, what are we going to be doing here?
Exactly. So in the next type of situation, we're not all the way to a sandbox. That's going to be part 3. But we instead have a plot line where there's like a big sort of overarching goal, or maybe there's multiple possible goals, but there's numerous just completely different adventures or mini adventures that the PCs could even take. Either towards one big goal, or maybe they don't even have a big goal and they're not connected. So an example where they're connected, you know what? The demon army is attacking. Okay, so we want to... They don't know that our resistance is here yet. So we want to, between the 3 demon generals, the one who brings the demon beasts, who is great on land, the one who has, like, the ocean horrors, who's great in the sea, and the one with the demon dragons in the sky, we can ambush one of them, then we can go attack the second one, but they'll kind of be prepared for us, and the third one is going to back off whoever we probably won't have time to beat them all, unless we did some weird thing splitting up, and they're going to be, like, defending the Demon Lord in the end. Yeah. So we get to decide what we're going to do. In that one, they're connected. There could be ones that are unconnected, where it's like, we want to, get rich or explore things, and there's this mountain to the west, and a swamp to the east, and a desert to the south, and you can go to any of those 3.
Yeah. So one of the things to keep in mind for this is that nothing is canon until the players see it. So let's say that you decide, okay, there's going to be one ambush, one like stronghold, and one like the fortress of the demon general. So you can say, okay, I can draw a map for the place where the ambush is going to be, and maybe the ambush is going, and maybe the ambush is in like attacking like more of a war camp. And you can decide, okay, if they went and attacked the dragons of the desert first, then that war camp is, it's on the sand, and like it has some other features about the approach to it, but you've still drawn a basic map of like the tents of the war camp that you can use regardless of how, whether it's in the sand or the forest or what have you. And then the second one, whichever one they do, that one's in more of a steady fortress. And, maybe you describe it as being like a sandstone fortress with certain other features if it's in the desert versus other things. But like if the basic architecture and structure of the encounters is the same, then you can use those pieces.
Then the third one is just in the castle of the main demon lord,
and you can decide, the castle looks like this, and you decide like what you're gonna do there. And maybe which one is gonna, and because the castle of the main demon lords later, you can wait and see what they choose and then decide how to customize there. So like maybe you decide, okay, well they left the dragons for last, so it makes sense for the castle of the main demon lord to make more use of aerial spaces and towers versus like they left the aquatic ones for last. They left the aquatic ones for last, so like let's do more with the moat. Whereas if they did the dragons, like maybe the moat's not as much of a big deal, but if they did and then vice versa, the aerial space isn't as much of a big deal if they did the ocean one last. So if you make a space that could work for any of them by having like, there's kind of an air thing here and there's kind of a water thing here, and what was the last one was the land beast. The land beast. Maybe the land beast one has more of like protection around the area, like a camp around the area that's defending it or what have you.
Right. And so another important technique that you're going to want to use here and when we get to the next type is going to be create something that you can use sort of as the hook or the introduction or the beginning of going into one of these multiple possible options for all of your options. But then you don't have to make everything else that's after that. Only make things that aren't going to change later on if the PCs level up, if you choose that one as a later option. So for example, if you decided, okay, I'm going to let them ambush the one of these groups of demons. So we'll talk about like the first scout that actually might screw up their ambush, and I'll have a little bit of notes for what that encounter would be on any of the three of them. And then, like Linda said, there's like a war camp that's going to be ambushed, and
yeah. So maybe okay, I have a general ability that I want to give that scout. I want to give that scout like a spyglass so they can see from super far away, and I want the scout to have some kind of a sneak attacky thing. But you haven't gone in and said, yes, because I know that scout's going to exactly level 6, I'm going to go in and do all the ticky-tack numbers and things like that. You have the basic framework, and then when you know what they're doing, you can come in and fill it more later.
So obviously, if you can get them to commit to something at the end of the previous session, you're in very good shape. If you didn't, then you might actually need to make out scouts for all of Earth, Sea, and Air. Even though you can't quite use the other ones, you might need to level them up and have them be scouts in the next section.
Or you might also be able to say, okay, I know they're going to do the ambush thing first, so here's my general scout idea. And here's what I'll throw on top of it if it's land. Here's what I'll throw on top of it if it's sea. Here's what I'll throw on top of it if it's air. But regardless, I know that they have, some kind of ranged attack and this kind of thing. And maybe there's like a slight difference in focus where it's like, okay, the land one, the ranged one is really good at their ranged attack and that's all they have, the flying one. And then like the sea one has like both a ranged attack and a melee attack. And it's kind of more balanced, and then like the land one is like weak ranged and like really focused on melee. But like the other stats are generally more similar. Or maybe you decide, okay, I have some pre-made stat blocks that I'm going to use as my baseline. I'm going to use like the scout from Game Mastery Guide level 4 or whatever, and then like I'm going to change it in this way based on this thing. So you're not going in and spending like a ton of work to do things. I find that when it comes to plans too, there are usually going to be some pieces that you don't use, and storing those in a kind of cut file where you can come back and use them later is very useful. So like if you set up a thing and you thought like, okay, how are the PCs going to that that the PCs need to learn where the enemy stronghold is. There's a few different ways you think they might gather information. One of them is going and talking to folks around the tavern to ask for rumors, and you come up with a few tavern NPCs they could ask for rumors. If they don't go to the tavern, there's no reason to throw out those NPCs. They just weren't the ones who were in the tavern that day, and they're the NPCs that they'll encounter next time they need a rumor in a tavern. And maybe you need to change the details a little bit, because maybe, one time the wilderness ranger was talking about the rumors of what was out in the forest camps that were relevant this time, and the next time they're talking about some other wilderness thing. But if you have like the general name and personality and things like that, there are pieces that you can just keep and use. And then the longer you're running a campaign, the more you GM, the more you can build up that toolkit of pieces that you can come in and grab when you need them.
Right. So in this example with the Demon Scout, where it was going to be a Demon Scout no matter what, it was a little easier because, like Linda said, maybe you could build a Scout and then give them wings and a dragon breath if it was a dragon, and give them tentacles if it's the ocean. But let's try the example where they're going to be exploring either in the desert for like the ancient desert ruined city, in the swamp for like the some kind of Catoblipas that was in the swamp, or going into the mountains to find like some like rare magic circle that's like high up in the mountains. So in that case, the three goals are different. The places you're going are different. But here's what you can do. Even if the players didn't tell you at the end of the last session what they want to do, where they want to go, you can prepare a little bit about all three of the areas. Think about some environmental hurdles and ways that people would need to prepare to get into those places. and potentially you could do a victory point system, or even just something with like a sandstorm for the desert, and have all of those prepared in advance for all three of the environments. Now, might one of them be a little easier if they go to it later? Maybe, but maybe that makes them feel growth that, hey, the desert's not too bad because we went there when we were higher levels. Or if you decide, no, but I kind of did want the desert to be more dangerous now that they're going there at higher levels, you could just upgrade the things that you put there if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, or maybe there's a way for the PCs to figure out, like, based on the people they're talking to, that the desert is more dangerous, and if they go there anyway, maybe they'll eventually decide to turn back when they see how dangerous it is. Cause
that's getting us more towards a sandboxy style situation in the third one, but that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And
but I think also, you can also decide to what you were speaking of. Maybe you decide on a structure and that each of them is going to have a victory point challenge, a hazard, and an encounter before you reach the location. And if you have kind of a set structure, that'll make it easier to slot things in
like
place.
A weather-based environmental hazard and a victory point thing, and then an encounter. And if you prepare that much, just a little bit for each one, then you could, and you have that completely ready in case they go there. And then you could be like, okay, so that desert ruins from the ancient civilization. I've drawn the map. I have an idea that a mummy who was the last survivor of that civilization is like kind of watching over the ruins, and I know what their deal is and their backstory, but you haven't studied out the mummy yet, right? You don't have to. And, like, some of there's like, multiple factions who are in this ruin, but, like, there's some constructs and undead that are still loyal to the mummy, but then there's this other group of insurgent creatures that's, like, controlled by, I don't know, some lamias that are in there.
Yeah.
And then you've got some things going on that you've thought about. And importantly, you've thought about like we said in the first thing, you've thought about the personalities, you've thought about the interplay. You didn't have to build the encounters yet, though, because here's the good thing, right? You do a little bit of that for each of them, because you figure, man, the PCs might go to any of these places. Maybe they'll go to all of them eventually. But the first session can be spent on going through those environmental hazards and the victory point system and that first encounter that you wrote. And
or maybe you want to make sure it's a full first session, so you create 2 encounters, and one of them maybe has a little more going on with it, and another one is like a monster straight from the monster core.
Yeah, or maybe the second encounter is one that would have been fine in any of the areas.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just something that you have that's ready to go, right? And so if you can get the session to end before they get to the big open up place where they're in the ruins, or they're going to the magic circle in the mountains, there's all these mountain areas, or they're in the swamp hunting the Katoblipas and all of these other creatures are in there.
Yeah.
As long as they don't get to the main encounter area yet, you then, after that session, they've locked themselves in, and you can fill in the details and the numbers that you know now that you know what level they are.
And if you're like, oh crud, this is finishing a little too soon, the whole encounter in the courtyard / outskirts of the location is a perfect thing that you can throw at that point and be like, all right, I'm going to toss one more like simple, and by simple I mean like one that doesn't require a lot of prep for you. So like, okay, yeah, there's like animals or some other type of creature that's not as complicated to run that you pull right out of a monster book, and that's what they fight just outside to kind of delay that and also give more of a sense of the approach.
Exactly. So that's sort of the second situation that you're going to run into. The third one is full on sandboxy. Players can do whatever they want. You've set up this world, their areas. Some of them are more dangerous than others, and some of them might be way too dangerous for the players to go into. Now, that's actually somewhat similar to the one that we've just been talking about here. There are some differences. One of them is, heck, it's okay to just completely stat out the statistics for creatures in any of these areas, because if it's too powerful or too weak, well, that's just what it is. It's a sandbox, right?
Yeah. Or another one is if you want things to generally be scaled to the players, you can stat them out and then adjust as needed for when they go to that place. I mean, you can use, if you want to do something completely off the cuff, you can use things like your weak and elite adjustments on things, or if you have a little more time, you can be a bit more granular with the way that you change things around, or you can, oftentimes I find that it's better to better to adjust numerically just the ones that are like the big heavy hitters, the most important, and then to like add more of the weaker ones. Unless they're like falling off the bottom of the scale in terms of weakness, just because then like it's like, oh, there's just more of them. That's easier to work with because you didn't have to mess with their numbers.
Yes. When you're also dealing with the sandbox situation for having multiple plans, and if you do want there to be some possibility that, like, hey, maybe you don't really want to do something that's super boring where they go back to a dungeon that was first level when they're level 6 and wipe it out, you could consider giving the villains or like main creatures that live in some of these areas plans and plots that they have that they're going to try to advance to become more powerful or to strengthen their grip and their number of minions.
Yeah, like for example, maybe you had planned a dungeon that's like, oh, here's a level 1 dungeon, it's a sewers, and the PCs can fight some dire rats and get a little treasure if they go here. But if they don't go to the sewers until they're level 6, time has passed, and by then the Thieves Guild has made a base down there, and so it uses the same map, but like the rats aren't really the threat anymore. Maybe there's like a rat swarm instead, and then they deal with the Thieves Guild on that same map.
Or if there's a place where you're dealing with a vampire ritualist, maybe they succeeded at the ritual and gained the power of a vampiric demon lord who gave them some additional demon minions to get the job done.
And maybe some of the people who maybe you had initially planned for, this NPC is like around the strength of a lieutenant that this boss has. But, by the time that the PCs have gone through various levels, they're more of the rank and file strength because the boss has gotten more powerful people.
But maybe they used to be a lieutenant and they're very resentful of the fact that these new demons that came in from the vampire demon lord have replaced them.
Yeah, so if you come up with sort of the story of why, as opposed to just saying, number go up because number go up. If you have like a reason in the story, then you can also, it's also fun then to be able to show signs of the plan you had before. Like, that's the Thieves Guild area now, but, maybe some of them have dire rats as pets or what have you, or there's signs that there used to be a lot of dire rats in the region that have been cleared out or what have you. The oozes are no longer there, but there's still, or the oozes have been domesticated into being a sewage disposal system.
Signs written in the Thieves Guild secret writing of, like, beware of dire rats.
Yes, exactly.
In the section where the dire rats were. So you can have nods to continuity and still like reuse the area with a little bit of differences.
That also means you don't have to be as concerned about like, oh, I let the PCs gather information and they learned about the dire rats in the sewers, but they never went back to that. And they're not like, wait a minute, there were just dire rats there. It wasn't a Thieves Guild. Then they see the signs of, oh yeah, there totally used to be dire rats there, but now it's a Thieves Guild.
Exactly. And so honestly, your situation gets a little bit easier in the sandbox than in the situation where you made not a sandbox but also gave a lot of options for the players to choose. The main difficulty is that, at least with the second example where there were these 3 major areas, those were the only places you could go. Whereas if you have like a sandbox with hexes and there's like 20 different hexes, you might have to do a lot of writing in advance before you can be ready with that sandbox. Well, one thing you can do there to help yourself out is to come up with some grab bag things in your pocket. Random encounters that could fit anywhere, but that are more interesting than just rolling a random encounter because you built them. Like random planned encounters that can... Oh, yeah, there's going to be a place where there's a wagon that broke down and there's like a gnomish inventor who's in there.
You're going to find a tower, and in that tower there's a magic-eating ooze that's intelligent. You're going to find, you're going to find whatever you come across that you can toss into a location. Another thing that's good to work with is sort of proximity. Because, yes, on a giant hex map, the players could go anywhere they wanted to, but they're probably going to explore things that are closer by first. If there's some cost to it, if it's going to take 3 days to travel out to this place, they're probably going to hit the main interesting destinations along the way. Or, if it's going to cost a lot of resources to go out places, then they're probably going to want to spend those resources wisely. So if there's a sense of the cost of time and resource and things like that, so that they want to do things more efficiently in some way because there's some degree of time pressure, then you can expect, yes, hypothetically the PCs could run 100 miles away down on the map and then do an encounter there and then go all the way back, but they probably won't. And so you can prepare the things that are more proximal.
The main danger that
yeah.
you have towards getting that 100 miles is
Mm-hmm.
not that they're going to ignore everything that's on the path,
Mm-hmm.
but that simply they're like that snake game where, you know, you don't necessarily want to run into your own tail too much.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time they've gotten to the hex that's 100 feet away, if there's a exploration, or similarly if this
Mm-hmm.
is a sandbox that's not on a map, by the time they've gotten to the very far out point or the very intricate plot, they'll have crossed through so many other places.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe they somehow avoided, if we use the hex back example,
Mm-hmm.
every single hex that you placed down that had anything substantive in it. It's possible, right? Unless you completely surround them with adventure hooks everywhere, maybe they somehow charted a path with, okay, well, let's go left this time, and then they managed to go 100 miles through 6 mile hexes without hitting anything except for this one thing that you thought was supposed to be like a major plot point down the line.
Mm-hmm.
But here's how you can avoid that: don't let them get that far. Because yes, you've drawn out some of the things on the map, and as Linda said, maybe you didn't draw as many that were farther away. So since you didn't draw as many that were farther away, that means there's probably should have been some in the medium distance that you just haven't drawn yet because you didn't expect them to go that way. So plop down one of your pre-prepared ideas into the space they happen to have gone to,
also,
so that they can encounter it.
And it's a natural thing that people will know more about what's close by than what's farther away, right? So like if it's far away, you know, they might know about like the lair of the dread dragon who no one who approaches ever survives, which like the PCs are then gonna be, maybe I shouldn't approach that. But you're not as likely to know about the more like approachable lower level encounters, or like, you know, that really cool restaurant with the gnome chef. You know, you're less likely, you're much more likely to know more detail about interesting things that are close by in terms of what you can find from people than things that are farther away. So when you present those things that are farther away, you know, you can choose to present things as like, you know, higher level goals or objectives, or things that are like, yeah, you know, that sounds like it would be fun, but I don't necessarily want to like, you know, do we really want to travel for 3 weeks to go to the great restaurant? I mean, maybe they do. You know your group, but like probably they're gonna want to like, oh well, we're gonna head out exploring this direction eventually anyway, and we can get to that great restaurant when we do.
Exactly. So as you can see, there's some differences between the three.
And that also like logically helps you out a lot, because you know, just because the NPCs in the town that the PCs are in right now don't know exactly, you know, the way they talk about things, they're not going to know exactly what's like 100 miles to the south of here in some random location. You're going to need to, they'll need to gather more information along the way about the things that are nearby, and so the NPCs can keep being plotted out as you go.
As you can see, there are some differences between these three different categories in terms of like which kind of strategies that you're going to be using. In particular, actually, the more sandboxy it is, sometimes the more okay it is for things to just be what they are. And the more that it was kind of close to a railroad but allowed the players to have more options on what to do, the more flexible you're going to have to be to handle things so that you can stay mostly on your railroad. However, there are a bunch of techniques that apply across all three of these, and they tend to involve having additional details that you can use to help you understand the full depth of the characters and locations, and having components prepared in your pocket that you can pull out and use when you need them.
So things like, you know, NPC names, little NPC buckets with like names and personalities and things like that you can grow, you can take out and plop in when you need them. Having a resource for stat blocks that you can draw in both for NPCs and for monsters to say, okay, yeah, that's why I mentioned Archives of Nethys being very useful for this, and being like, oh yeah,
in Pathfinder 2.
And Pathfinder 2. Or you know, whatever system that you have, though, if there's like a book that has pre-written things, or if you're, you know, maybe you are mining pre-written adventures, that's another really good source for things. You know, I've definitely had cases where I say, okay, I want something like this, and I realize there's a pre-written adventure that does something similar. I can grab it and I can mine it, and then I can say, all right, well, I used part 3 of 5 of this adventure for this, but then because I didn't use any of the rest of the adventure, I can pick the rest of it apart for parts whatever I want, because I can be like, oh well, you know, I didn't use this wizard in part 4 because I only did the things from part 3, but like later on they're going to encounter a wizard and I can use this as a starting point. So definitely gathering and mining resources is very helpful, as is having those things that are like loosely created that you can slap on more details later when you need.
Right. The more mined resources, little small things that you can pull out, and just general little tricks you have up your sleeve, the less likely you're going to be that you have to like just suddenly be like and stop when your players do something befuddling and bewildering, which they will do, that you never expected them to do.
Yeah, and I think also another important thing is knowing that, you know, you're going to have areas that are more detailed and less detailed. When the players catch you by surprise, it's completely fine to be like, you know what, for this area, you know, our map of this dungeon is going to be kind of like a ball and stick map of how do the rooms connect until we get to a room where there's an encounter, and then I'll draw out an encounter room, right? You know,
that might save you time even if you have a more detailed
yeah
map.
I mean, I personally am a fan of that kind of strategy, particularly for like larger encounter locations, just kind of being, you know, let me draw, so ball and stick, like I'm gonna draw a circle for this room and then like lines to show how the rooms connect, and then when you're actually fighting in the geometry of the room really matters, then you can get into like what are the angles of the corners and exactly how tall is the ceiling and how many shelves are there in here that might provide cover and things like that. Sort of, you know, the map equivalent of Rule 0, you know, where you don't want to prep all this stuff that you don't need.
Or first
rule, yeah. Sorry.
First rule of Dungeon Craft.
First rule of Dungeon Craft, not Rule 0. Wrong rule. But anyway, yeah. So the map equivalent of that, where it's like you just
Rule 0 is you can make whatever you want.
No, Rule 1, don't prepare more than you need.
Which is different than the 0th rule of Dungeon Craft, I guess. But it's a Rule 0, which is, I guess, Rule 1 in Pathfinder 2, means that you can change anything you want, which means you could change the first rule of Dungeon Craft to be called Rule 0.
Well,
so
there
then
you
it'll
go.
be fine.
All right, well, regardless. Yeah. So yeah, that way you can be more flexible with that kind of thing, and you know, I think players are understanding that when they just throw you a complete curveball, you know, sometimes you're gonna need time to figure that out. Sometimes that's a good time to take a break in the middle of the session if you're like, okay, this is not, you know, we've only been playing for a couple hours, things just got thrown into a complete curveball, I'm really not sure, you know, let's go ahead and get an early dinner, and then we'll reconvene after, or what have you. You know, or let's take a break for half an hour, you know, folks can chat about their lives, and I, the GM, will figure out what I'm doing I'm doing next.
It's very, very reasonable, and it's common when someone does something really weird to give yourself some time.
Yeah, like, and I think, and it's also totally appropriate to talk to the players if they're like, blah, you know, and you're just not really sure how to proceed, you know, about what they want to get out of what they're doing. You know, if you totally expected things to be, you know, this was totally supposed to be a combat area because these villains that the PCs are fighting against are, you know, this heinous evil group, and they've decided like, well, actually we want to try to team up with them against this other villain that we had, and you just like, we're not, you know, ready for that. You know, talking to them about like, what are they trying to achieve? It's like, you know, if you want to ask them like, are you actually trying to ally with them, or are you just planning to backstab them later? You know, because then the way you prepare for that is going to be completely different.
And you might just have to stop for the session. You might be like, all right, we have to stop early. I need more time to prepare. But you can try to figure out, even just give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to figure out if you can do it now or if you need to stop the session. And sometimes you can figure something out even that works in when the PC do something really off the wall. Like an example we've given before in a previous video is when Linda was running a Pathfinder Society adventure. So you have to run it kind of like as is. And the PCs, it was in Pathfinder 1st Edition, scried on the NPC we were supposed to rescue who had been met in a previous adventure. So they had met her and they had possessions from her that they were given.
Yes.
It turned out that she was in a location
and they were aware of the location.
That they were aware of because it was a dig site that the Pathfinders and the venture captains like, I know exactly where this is once they saw that. Because sometimes you're not aware of the location. Yeah. You can't teleport from the scry. It's like, yeah, I can tell you exactly where that is. And then teleported. And then Linda's like, I need like 10 to 15 minutes. And then...
And the player's like, we don't have to do this. Are you sure? And I'm like, yep.
Yeah,
give me
they
a
were
few
like,
minutes.
you don't have to let us succeed at this.
Mhm.
We know it was like pretty mean because it's a Pathfinder Society scenario. And then Linda proceeded to take us there, which is where the boss was, which is also where the
Mhm.
hostages were.
Yeah.
We fought the boss.
So it was like,
at-
okay, based on that,
and then
they're
we
gonna appear
went
in the center of the
backwards.
boss encounter, and they're gonna get a surprise round because what the heck was that?
We had to go backwards, and we had to bring the
Mhm.
hostages along with us, and it was an escort mission. It was
Yeah.
way more dangerous. There's one encounter with 32 really easy
Mhm.
monsters that not only could not threaten even the wizard in the party that we were bringing, but could have been fireballed and killed in one hit.
Mhm.
And when we had like 16 non-combatants, they were not only threatened by those 32 weaklings, but we couldn't do a fireball because they would hit the non-combatants.
Whereas you would have been able to do that the other way around. And the other way around, the elevator would have been going down, so it would have been much less threatening, the idea that the elevator might get dropped while you were trying to go, than when you were trying to go up and had non-combatants with you. So some parts of so like, the final encounter became much easier because it was actually the first encounter you got an ambush and were fresh, and then later parts of the adventure became harder because you were having to deal with the extra escort mission component, and I figured that was a fair trade-off.
Exactly. So, and if you might not have been able to come up with this in the same way that Linda would in 10 to 15 minutes, and that's okay because you want to talk to your players. And as Linda said, the players who came up with this were like, it's okay if this doesn't work, we'll just go the normal way. And you might need to accept that from your players. You don't have to be like Linda if you're not sure that you can live up to what Linda did and be like, no, I'll figure it out. You can be like, okay, I'll take you up on that. Somehow it doesn't work. There's magical radiation and the teleport doesn't work. Thanks, guys, for playing along with this.
Yeah.
That there is no harm and no disgrace or dishonor in doing that.
I think just when you do that, you want to make sure, like, let's say that you decided that there were teleport blocking shenanigans, so they couldn't do their teleport thing, and they identified that there were teleport blocking shenanigans with a check or what have you.
And that's maybe after the players offered to be like, we don't need this.
You want to make sure, though, that, like, the enemy, if you're going to pick that solution, that the enemies don't rely on their special teleport magic to do things in a way that's like, wait, but you said that wouldn't work. Like, that your explanation is something that is coherent and consistent, or is coherent and consistent with the world.
As we've talked about in previous episodes, you're the GM, you are the window into the world, and the players need the consistency because they need to know that the decision making that they make is based upon some kind of logic that they can understand rather than just like whatever you come up with that moment.
Or maybe, the enemies rely on teleportation, but they each have like a talisman that allows them to get past the anti-teleportation field, and the PCs don't encounter anyone with that talisman until they get deeper into the dungeon. And then once they encounter someone who has that talisman, then they can teleport after that point, or something like that. So as long as the player, because I definitely have seen situations where it's like, where people get frustrated because the GM doesn't let them do a particular strategy, and then like something bad happens to like NPCs or to the PCs because they was like, oh well, you didn't think to do this, and the player's like, I did think to do that, but you didn't let me. So like,
you have to keep that in mind.
When you
have to get
block
that in
off
mind.
certain avenues.
We talk about that all the time when it comes to like making improvised rulings.
Yeah.
The point of fairness and consistency isn't even that it needs to be exactly the same, but it needs to be predictable enough that the PCs can make decisions. And so like, let's say that Linda did go with those other two PCs when they were like, you know what, you don't have to let this work, right? So if she did, then in that situation you'd want to like give them their spells back maybe, or since it was already more than a day away, other than the fact that we teleported there, just be like, okay, and you get back your spells when you prepare the next day, so it didn't cost you anything. As opposed to be like, well, you used it, or being nasty in some other way, be like, well, there was teleportation interference, and you take 100 damage as you teleport into the rock and get trapped down there, or something like that. You want to be like very gracious when you have to mulligan on something.
Yeah. So that's why I was starting to get into the sort of check. You might go ahead and prompt for like everybody like I'm rolling Arcana. You might roll an Arcana check for everybody or whatever, and be like whichever secret roll you got was the highest, be like, that this, as long as like anybody got something reasonably decent, like that this, that you can sense arcane currents that inform you that this is
if
this
someone
kind of
got
thing.
low enough, they can get a critical failure.
If someone got low enough, they can get a critical failure, what have you. But like, going ahead and like either if it's a secret check in a game like Pathfinder, rolling it or like prompting people for a check to give them the information that you need to have in their hands, or just flat out saying that like. Maybe it's a little bit of a bludgeon to just flat out give them the information, but if there's an avenue that you're closing and you need that door closed, it's kind of like the general principle of, don't have a roll unless there's like a difference between success and failure. If you need them to have an information, then you're not going to lock it behind a roll.
Well, another option that you have if you're going to do this is, let's say they roll it, everybody fails because it's knowledge that they might not have had, but you know what? Some of your PCs are like wizards, they're scholars. When a scholar fails and they don't know the thing, that doesn't mean that you just say, okay, nothing, everybody. You can just be like, okay, so this teleportation didn't work. You're not sure why, but you don't know a particular reason why it didn't work, but there probably is a reason. Yeah. And that's something that you might be able to find in a library or ask other arcane scholars for.
Yeah.
So, right? You don't have to just tell them, okay, well, I'm not going to tell you why you rolled the secret roll. You can give them a failure result that honestly portrays their failure as not knowing, but explains what the roll was for that they failed and that they know that they don't know.
Yeah. Or, and it's like, there's probably some kind of interfering magic or like some kind of a substance that is infused in the area or something, and you're just not really
sure.
There's any number of
possibilities.
You're not really sure what it is.
Exactly.
And then let's say that you have a session break coming up.
Maybe you
don't know why yet. And then you can say, maybe the player can't. Maybe the success result for the player is like, you got some interesting data. It's going to take a little time to analyze it and figure out why this thing worked. And then come next session, you totally know why now, even though you didn't last time.
And maybe it's a really interesting reason.
Yeah.
And it makes it for like a different adventure than you were even expecting. That's all based on like this weird thing that you came up with after the session.
Yeah, so you decided, that the reason was because of some kind, was the reason because of, something that the occupants of that area proactively put into place and are trying to use? Was it something that was left over from someone in the past? If so, do they know about it? Do they make use of it? Does it get in their way? Do they not know about it? It's just kind of a secret. Is it like, a magical ritual? Is it like a lead in the walls? If it's lead in the walls, are there other effects of having the lead in the walls? Are there ways to get around it that have to do with why it's there?
Yeah. So Linda is once again demonstrating why the number one tip for all three kinds of preparing for multiple situations is control the session break. Know when you can do a session break and use it to your advantage. Because having these weird session breaks that don't just neatly tie things up in a bow and stop at a point where there's a question that's open, lets that question be open even to you.
Yes.
And then you can solve it after the session break. It's not only good cliffhanging. Yeah. That's why this is our number one tip of the entire video. If you don't remember anything else that we said in this video and you just want the TLDR and we someday make a timestamp or something on this, that is the tip.
Yeah. And another thing, too, is that if you make the break there and you realize, in the last 3 minutes of the session when I was trying to put things together, I said a thing that now my plan doesn't quite work because of that one thing that I said. It's a lot easier to start the next session and be like, I said XYZ, but I realized it doesn't quite work. Actually, it's ABC. And then here's the other things. Because then, you haven't, had players take a lot of actions that were based on information that you then need to retcon because you realized that while you were trying to say things off the cuff, you painted yourself into a corner.
Exactly. And you know what? The players are not going to remember exactly what you said last time, probably anyway. And even if they do, you could just tell them, hey, I had to change it up while I was thinking about things afterwards. So it's easy enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I think that covers what I wanted to say in terms of how to make plans that can survive the contact with the players by having multiple ideas ready to go.
Likewise for me.
In that case, everybody, if you're watching just for the topic, bye for now. But if you're here live, let's talk about what the next episode will be.
Indeed.
So vote by putting a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 into chat for Build an NPC Workshop, Ask Arcade Mark, Game Design Q&A, Table Talk, Stormlight RPG Beta, Arcade Mark Plays, or other. What do you guys want to see? For our next Tuesday episode. Let's see. We have one vote for Ask Arcade Mark, Game Design Q&A. Let's see what other votes that we have right now.
Is Terry the only one with an opinion today?
I don't know. Yes, Stormlight, is the Cosmere one. I guess we should have said Cosmere RPG Beta. Mm-hmm. Yes, 3 is actually Cosmere.
All right, we have a 2. We have a 1. We have a 4. Everybody's got a different opinion today.
Yeah, I will put that, in fact, with...
we have a 3.
We've got a 3.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I'll put that with Cosmere, so that if I ever grab this again later, that we have the correct name for it.
Oh, man. Is it just a complete 1d4?
2, 3, 4. Every single one of the non-other ones got a single vote. Okay. There we go. I think it might be a D4 unless there's somebody else who's here who wants to
break the tie. Or if anybody wants to change their vote to guarantee that their second choice wins.
That's true. We'll see what's going on here while this is happening. Google is not at its fastest of all time.
Google does not feel like rolling a D4 right now. All right, we have...
All right. So, Paul says that Linda breaks all ties.
Oh, but I said we roll a D4.
And Linda said that we rolled a D4.
I defer to the dice gods.
And Kojo, it is true that people are talking about the Cosmere thing on YouTube because it is, just for clarification, it is a new RPG that has been kickstarted starting a few days ago that's made, how many millions at this point? A lot.
Well, Kojo says my second choice is almost 1. And the D4 rolled a 1, so I think that means that 1 has it.
I think it means that 1 probably has it.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that I was surprised that actually people usually make us do table talk. And it lost twice in a row.
Well, that gives me more time to prep.
That does give us more time to prep for table talk.
Because we did wanna actually play it before we do that one.
That's true. But it's made $7.36 million.
Excuse me.
If it doesn't win soon, it's actually not going to happen before the campaign is over. All right, we'll do 1. Mm-hmm. We're going to do Build an NPC Workshop.
It's going to be cool to do a workshop live on YouTube.
Yes, this will be our first workshop that was live on YouTube. So let me go to Twitch. Mm-hmm. Ironically, because Twitch has a place to put up what the upcoming episodes are.
We should put a note that says we should put something on Twitch that's indicating that we're actually on YouTube, so that folks who go to Twitch will be like, "Hey, go to YouTube, please."
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway,
so take care, everyone, and we'll see you on Saturday when we're gonna play Astraea, the video game, and on Tuesday.